Great introduction, thank you. Like Amy said, I was in the military and still am. About 10 years active duty, and then I've been serving as a reservist for the last 6 years. So I had that transition from military experience, still gain it, and then now I'm applying it as a medical pilot in the civilian sector. So a little bit more background on me. I grew up in Montana. I grew up in Havre, Montana. Went to school up there, and then joined the Navy in 2001, July 2001, and stayed in through there. And of course, great experiences that I got in the Navy, flying helicopters around, doing all those things she talked about. But the one thing that I'd like to impress upon you is that, or at least share with you, is that the things that were the most fulfilling and the most exciting to me had nothing to do with flying around chasing narcotics guys or pirates off the coast of Somalia or anything like that. It was the leadership challenges that I had, the people that I got to serve with, and everything that came along with that. So when I first started out, one of the first things that you do as a young officer, I was an ensign at the time, just barely out of flight school. I had duty. I had a squadron watch. I was responsible for ensuring that all the aircraft were flying, everything was going correctly throughout the squadron's daily operations. That was my job. And part of that, I had to go and talk to my executive officer and talk to him. He's the second in command of the squadron. So he shared with me, he knew it was my first time on watch, but he shared with me a story about Pearl Harbor. In 1945, or excuse me, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. We know this story. We're all very familiar with that in basic history. But there was a few things that happened on there that maybe we didn't know about or aren't commonly known, but are applicable, and they were applicable to me as a young officer. And it's going to be the bridge that I'll share with you to applying your leadership and how you create it. So, of course, that attack occurred about 7:55, December 4th. The USS Alwyn is in port. It's one of the ships. That's it right there underway, obviously, but it's in port in Pearl Harbor. It's Sunday morning. Everybody's either ashore, asleep, or not there. It's a minimal crew on the ship. The attack occurs. The senior man on there is Ensign Stanley Kaplan. So who's familiar with the military rank structure? You understand the kind of the hierarchy of that. And ensign is the lowest ranking officer in the Navy, comparable to like a lieutenant, second lieutenant in the Army or other services. So very inexperienced, basically no experience whatsoever. Ensign Kaplan had about 3 months in as an ensign right there. So gives you an idea. They get the attack happens. Ensign Kaplan's the senior man on board. He's in the position of authority. They managed to get the ship underway inside of about an hour. So think of that. Think of the kind of the vastness of one of these warships and what it takes to do. Typically, with a full complement, with a full crew, with everybody on there, it would take about 2.5 hours. These ships ran on boilers, so they had to build up steam inside the engines to run the propellers. They did it inside of an hour. So it's pretty impressive. They got the ship ready to go and got it underway. Now, the thing about being in port with a warship is you're a sitting duck. You can't really defend yourself, right? You're sitting there moored up. There's nothing you can do. Not only did they get underway, as they were going out the channel to leave Pearl Harbor, they shot down 3 enemy aircraft. Once they got out underway, they were on station for 36 hours. This was with half the crew with this very junior and inexperienced officer. And an interesting note on that too, as they were going underway, the actual commanding officer, once he figured out that the attack was going on, garnered a small boat and was chasing them out of the harbor. He never caught him, not until 36 hours later. So he was trying, but these guys were hell-bent. They were going to get away from the attack and take the attack to the enemy. Okay, so pretty interesting story, right? Has anyone ever heard that one? Same thing happened on the USS Blue. Ensign Nathan Asher, he was a little bit more senior, 3 years experience in the Navy. He got their ship underway. Same thing. We see the same things. He actually had orders from his commanding officer not to leave whatsoever. He knew when to break the rules, obviously. That they were in the same boat. They shot down one enemy aircraft. They went out to sea and sunk a small mini Japanese submarine. So pretty impressive, right? Again, limited crew, very inexperienced folks. This happened on 10 different ships in Pearl Harbor. And when my executive officer was sharing this with me, his point wasn't to inspire me with heroics, was that these things just don't happen. There's a reason. When this happens on 10 different occurrences, there must be something going on. So that was kind of one of the sparks in my mind of what leadership meant and how it applies in the overall picture, especially in the military. Okay, so was it an accident? Like I said, heroics of leadership. How did these things happen? And some of the things that I'd ask you or to think about in these cases, who were the leaders in this? You know, there's a lot of folks that were on the ship that weren't on the ship. What was their role in this? But as you think of that, how does it apply to you? And how does it apply to the people you work with, the people that are in your family, the people that are in your church, your sports teams, all aspects of your lives? And that's really kind of the point that I want to drive at. Well, oftentimes we think of as leadership as a very professional or job-related skill set, and that's where it leaves. But it has so much application in all parts of our lives. So one of the things the military shows, and there's a lot of different, if you were to pick up a military handbook on leadership, there'd be like communication, trust, organization, all these things. But there's a lot of things that I found that are inherent in creating the leader in the military. And that's it applies to everybody. Those ranks, the ensign or the seaman first class, the highest and the lowest, the admirals to the chiefs. These are all ranks that have varying degrees of authority in the military. But leadership doesn't apply to just rank. Leadership applies to everybody, and that's something that we saw in this attack, that there were people that stepped up into positions even though they didn't have the authority. We oftentimes think of that bombastic leader, and this is one of the kind of the stereotypes that floats out there. You see a military movie about this general standing on top of his Jeep while he tells the troops to charge the machine gun nest at the top of the hill. You know, and you'll hear terms like, I order you to do this. And those just aren't true. It does happen in some regards, but for the successful leaders of the military, they're not that type of person. And it certainly doesn't work in the military or in any other aspect of our lives. So again, I come back to that leadership versus authority. So I'll ask you, in your minds, what is the difference between leadership and authority? Can you think of those times where somebody may be in a position of leadership, but they don't have the authority? Or vice versa. There's plenty of people that have authority, but we wouldn't classify them as a leader at all. Again, same thing with rank. You know, we don't classify in the military the leader is associated with rank. And it shouldn't be any different into the civilian sector, right? You know, we'll have managers or, you know, parents or whatever the case is. They may have the authority, they may have that rank, but they're not going to necessarily be a leader. So it's something really important to think about and kind of build in your mind the difference between the two. And this is something that the military taught me. Another thing that was ingrained so much in that was our situational leadership, and the fact that your leadership and how you apply it, your influence can change drastically from moment to moment in situations. In the aircraft, we'll be flying And if I'm the aircraft commander, that means I have signed for that aircraft. I've written my name down that says I have ultimate authority for this thing. And if anything goes wrong, it's my fault. If we're going into a landing zone and there's trees and wires and things like that, it's very risky. And contacting any of those things could ultimately mean a crash and ultimately death of the crew, loss of the aircraft. So that's my burden to bear. But if I'm going in and I have the crewman sitting in the back, or in the air medical sense, the nurse and the medic, and they're back there and they look at and they see something I can't see. They see a wire or a tree or something that I might be headed towards to hit, and they say, "Hey, Matt, you need to come to the left or else." That's when that's an example of situational leadership. Now I have the authority of that aircraft, but they've taken over as a leader and said, I'm not just going to be a passive person in this. I'm going to be an active participant, and I'm going to help out with this. I'm going to direct you in a way that makes us all better and all safer. Okay, so another thing the military does is start small. You know, whether it's your own leadership or how you apply to others, how you kind of keep that passed on. If you were in any of your professions, whatever it is, your technical professions, as a nurse, do you start out assisting surgeries right away, you know, right out of school? Absolutely not. You know, it starts in small ways. You might start out starting an IV, and that progression continues to grow. You know, and the same applies with leadership. In the military, we never had, no one ever comes in as in charge of a ship, like Ensign Kaplan did. But the truth is he didn't start out in that position, right? He had time. They built him up. They started him up small. That's why it worked. That's why it worked in 10 different cases, is that they started with small tasks and built him up to that position to where he could take over. So in thinking with that, reflect on those past managers, leaders, bosses that you've had, and think, how were they good or bad? Has anyone ever had a bad boss or a bad manager? You know, I mean, just a quick show of hands, like, yeah, almost everybody, right? Is it because they're a bad person? Bad intentions? Probably not. Do you think it's because they didn't know what they were doing? How many think it was because they got put in a position not because of their leadership abilities, but because they had some other technical abilities, or they were a nice person? Is that probably the case? Yeah. So that's where that start small portion comes in, is that while that person, they're not a bad person inherently, they might be a bad boss or a bad leader, but they never had that chance to start small and build up their chance to become a good leader. Because it is a learned group of skills, you know, the communication, the trust, the organization. If you've never had a chance to actually communicate with people on any kind of level, it gets really hard to do that when all of a sudden you're thrust in those positions without any experience whatsoever. So we'd always say in the military, crawl, walk, run. You got to start small. Go with those easy challenges first. And one other part of that is the appropriate application. So again, you're not going to give somebody a high consequence task to fulfill when they're starting out as a leader. You might give them something simple like plan a Christmas party for your division. Well, there's all those elements that go into it. They need to communicate, they need to organize, they need to plan. All those elements of leadership, they need to have a vision and focus. All those elements apply, but the consequence is not all that high. If the Christmas party doesn't go that well, some people might be a little bit offended, and it's not the end of the world though. But the consequence of leading a ship into war, that's a little bit higher. So you want those things sussed out early on. So other things that the military, and this is probably the big one, is embrace all people. you know, again, it's easy to think of those stereotypical military leaders in this rank structure and, you know, everyone calling each other sir or these very strict titles. But again, a stereotype that isn't necessarily true, certainly not when you get into the teamwork aspect of it. And it comes from that ultimate empathy, looking at each other as a team and being able to understand what's going on in that other person's mind, and having to be able to not only understand it but feel it and act upon it and use your influence to take that into account. Again, that group thinking, putting others first, is really that true teamwork. And I played sports in high school. I've been on a lot of teams, but I never was on a team like being at sea with the Navy. Everybody just thought of each other. Everybody put each other first. There was never a race to the chow hall who could get in line first. It was always a race who could get in back. Everyone was always thinking about each other. And then that mentality carried on to how we conducted daily operations and how we flew in the aircraft and how we worked on the helicopter and all parts of it. We were constantly looking out for each other. And it really became just a beautiful embrace of people. And you'll see that in many military units, whether they're in Afghanistan or they're out in the middle of the ocean, is that they love each other because they embrace each other and they know each other really well. And we saw that without that teamwork aspect, Ensign Kaplan and Asher could not have got those ships underway. It wouldn't have been possible. They alone, one person can't do that. Same thing in our organizations and our families. Not one person can just do it all. Some people think they can, but it's pretty hard to organize a lot of people and get a common task done without that. Another thing, we all have the common goal in the Navy. And again, I come back to those experiences where we talk about like giving orders. You know, I order you to do this. I never heard that one time in the military. Never heard that one time. But we all knew what we had to do. We all had the same direction. And they're all based upon the same values. We had those values, honor, courage, and commitment instilled in us from the time we were at boot camp, officer candidate school, Naval Academy, whatever the case is. We all knew. You all knew that this day that helicopter has to fly. We're all going to make a concerted effort to get that mission done, get the aircraft off the deck and make it happen. Like I said, I never had to go out and tell anybody, or no one ever told me, I order you to do this. And that comes really with alignment. And how many organizations have you been in where you've seen silos? You know, you have somebody that's in an operations role and somebody that's in a marketing role and somebody that may be in a safety role, and they have their strict silos. No, I do operations. No, I do safety. But they don't have that common vision. They don't have that alignment to come together. And that's an important part that the Navy showed me, and something that I started to see as I made that transition to civilian life, that it's very important to create that. And we saw that on the All One in Blue and the other ships as well, that they all had the same goal. There wasn't any question, there wasn't any dissension. They got that ship underway in less than an hour, not because of any other reason. They knew exactly what they needed to do. Everybody was working as a team at the same time. Okay, so another part is passing it on. Who will act in your absence? Training your replacement. Again, I'll ask you another question. How many leaders, managers, whatever, have a very kind of a structured view and don't share what they're doing or how they should do it, or the people that work for them or work with them, any insight in it? Has anyone ever seen that one before? Yeah. And what happens when they leave? Chaos, right? No one really knows. Everyone's kind of standing around looking at each other. Well, they're gone. I don't know how we should do this. But the things that I learned is that that's absolutely not okay in the military, because we need to be able to pass it on and share those leadership abilities with each other. Because, you know, dreadfully in the military, that person that's in that role, they might die in combat, you know, and we can't afford to have the system stop because of that. Mentorship was a big part of that too. You know, finding that person that was above your rank or above your timing, and somebody that was not really there to give you orders, and like I said, that didn't happen, but to give you direction and share their experiences with you and how it could apply to your life. And that is a big part of what we did. And I still keep in close contact with my mentors that I had in the military. And it wasn't anything that was formal. There was no program that set someone aside and assigned to me that and said, you must cover these 5 things today when you talk to your mentor. No, it wasn't that at all, but it was part of the culture. And all those coming together create that redundancy that we wanted in how we pass on our leadership and our mentorship to each other. So I come back to this. Who are the leaders on the USS Alwyn and Blue? Anybody have any ideas? Like, if you could, would you say Ensign Asher and, yeah. How about the folks? All of them, absolutely. Absolutely, all of them. Here's the point that I'd like to make, is how about the ones that weren't on the ship? I told you there was 50% manning, right? There was half the crew was gone. How about those guys that were on shore? Were they leaders to that? Were they leaders in that situation? I like to think so. You know, that didn't just occur because they hadn't passed it on. It didn't just occur where those folks stepped into those roles and took that ship and took it to war if they hadn't been there to train and help and mentor those folks. So, just to review these real fast, and I ask, think of it how it applies to you. Each one of these bullets, you know, in your life. And not just in, like I said, in your organizational lives, but in your family lives. How does it apply when you're dealing with your spouse? How does it apply when you deal with your kids? How does it apply when you're on your sports teams? You know, it's easy to apply it at the workspace. You know, we have very structured things going on with that, but beyond that, what does it mean? So, a couple of things that I've come up with in creating your leadership and how you, or that I feel are important. Really taking the time to reflect on those parts of your life, like I said, where those voids exist. You know, how do you interact with your spouse? Does it do those things like passing it on work, or are you using your authority with them? And challenge your own authority on that. It's easy to wield that knife of authority around when we have it, when we're in those positions that are great and we have the power to give someone orders. But does that always mean that we should do that? Does that always mean we're being ethical when we do that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But it does take a lot of introspection to determine if that's applicable. This may be the hardest thing I could ask you to do, or anyone to do, is really take that in, listen without judging. As a leader or in any influential situation, when you're having a conversation with someone, how many times are you sitting there judging exactly what they're saying and forming your retort to that before they've even completed their sentence or their paragraph? Pretty much all the time. How many times are you sitting there actually taking in every part of what they're saying and understanding it from their perspective and feeling what they're feeling and understanding what their vision is for their agenda? It's hard to sit and listen to somebody and not do that, not judge, not make that report. So in creating your leadership, that is something I would challenge everybody in this room on, and everybody to continue with that challenge. So in that tune, the continued charge of passing your leadership along. They don't stop. This is something that is not a, well, I've taken a course, a seminar, I've got a mentor, like, I'm good now, got it. Everybody follow me because I'm awesome. It's something that continually needs to grow within you, and you continually need to reflect on. It's a timeless set of skills, so continue to make it timeless. And reflect on how that can affect everybody that's around you. So, true leaders don't create followers, they create more leaders. And that's the part that I really want to leave you with the most, is that leadership isn't about that authority, it's about continuing that role so folks that you love and care about can keep going on with those skill sets that your organizations, your families, your friends, your teams can be successful and happy in their lives. Thank you guys very much. You know, this is a little smaller venue, and I think that's awesome. This room has been great. So in that tune, does anyone have any stories they'd like to share or any thoughts that they've had on it? Because, you know, I mentioned a few things in there about continuing to pass it on and thinking about these things. And I'd love to hear anybody that has.
Well, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So how have you found ways to, you know, bring those elements into?
Yeah, that's a great question. Two things come right to mind. Lead by example. It's really hard for anyone to sit and with someone else and take suggestions from someone else when they're not doing what you asked of them. So that example is so important. And then culture. Too, creating a culture, and those two things aren't necessarily linear. They kind of go parallel with each other. So creating a culture through the example that you bring, and helping to create that alignment. When the culture is that the operations guys and the marketing guys work together, you don't even have to think about it. It's often done because the example has been set somewhere along the way, and that common goal is there. Does that answer your question? Yeah, good question. Yes, ma'am.
Don't you think that in the military, I would just guess, because I've been in the military either, that part of the reason that it might be a little bit easier to have everyone working for a common goal and working together is the fact that you are potentially going to be in a life-threatening situation at some time.
Sure.
And in a manufacturing, in a work scenario, and places I've worked, where, you know, marketing or sales are always having conflicts with the manufacturing side.
Yeah.
Even though you are trying to achieve a common goal of whatever that finished product is, it isn't a life and death. You know, nobody more than likely will die.
Right.
If you guys don't work together.
It's a great point. The fact that you could die in the military, but the thing I would say to that is there's a lot of challenges we see in the civilian workplace that we dread as much as death, as much as I hate to say that. You know, being embarrassed in front of our peers, professional recognition or the loss of that, the loss of trust. And then just failure in your given profession, whatever it is. I didn't meet my sales goals, or I didn't achieve the end means on this project. You know, there's a lot of times, there's been plenty of times where I was in life-threatening situations in the Navy, in the helicopter, and I can think of much more stressful times that I wasn't, when those were the cases in my civilian job, where I was more concerned with the achievement of a project and what its outcomes were, how my peers felt about me. So while they're slightly different, what I would say is that you can tap into the resources in a similar manner and kind of leverage those points where, yeah, maybe it's not life or death, but it is, you know, being empathetic towards someone's professional
well, and also the fact that, you know, in the long run, if sales and manufacturing don't support each other, then the work is not going to get done, which means that you're going to lose clients, which means everybody's going to lose your job. So you really,
That's
to me, it was always so logical. It's like, we do have a common goal here.
yes,
Why are we
it is.
fighting with each
Yeah,
other?
yeah, and I would bet, I'd venture to say that the culture was probably marginal in that situation.
Meaning,
Just the overall direction of the company, the culture of leadership, the culture of.
yeah, I mean, as far as the owners of the company or
Mhm.
what they were trying to, yeah, but it was definitely more combative, type of scenario where, anyway.
No, it's great, yeah.
It's just an interesting, I understand exactly what you're saying. And
Yeah.
I do believe in the trickle-down theory that if the culture or the owners or whoever is at the top don't pass on, their values and their goals, and where everybody is working for a common goal, you have this infighting.
Oh, without a doubt. It all starts at the top. And that is part of the burden of being a leader, is that responsibility lies with you.
Well, that was such a good point there at the end about, your job as a leader is to pass on.
It is. It's
teach
so
other
important.
people how to be leaders.
Yep. And that's where it's so often confused, authority and leadership,
Right.
is folks don't know how to kind of use those in their appropriate manner, and they oftentimes abuse it instead of use it. So, yeah, especially to their own detriment too, right? I mean, like I said, that person is absent for a little while, they go away. What's their workload when they come back? Probably 4 times as much, right? Because no one could do anything that they did. They couldn't help out. Things ultimately ceased. So, of course, that means late nights, more work, more stress. Take that home, trickle-down effect to just a bad life. Yeah, great question, though, sir.
Were there situations in the military side of things where you had people on the team that maybe weren't pulling their weight or were combative or something like that? And if so, what kind of strategies did the teams apply to sort of bring people into alignment?
That's a great question. Yes, to answer your question, ultimately, if I took a room full of sailors and put them in uniform, you knew they were sailors, right? If I said, go change into your civilian clothes, they'd come in, you may not know that. They're people. They're people just like any other organization, and they act just the same. And there's a selective process to getting into the military, but ultimately you have people being people, and we encounter that a lot. So one of the big things, and kind of coming back to that teamwork, empathetic aspect, is the social pressures that you can put on the group, be it rewards or taking something away that can help create that alignment, and they can support each other in that effect, and knowing that they're all driving towards that common goal. So we need to help that sailor that may be a little bit unaligned to bring them back in.
So would the realignment come from the group itself, or would the leadership? I mean, I don't know if there's a specific example, and I know being fairly vague, or would the leader of the group sort of step in, or would it be a combination of all of that?
It's a combination of all of that, and again, that's the responsibility of leadership, and I see is coming back to that empathy. What is your group dynamic? What is your culture? Can that group take over, and will the masses, so to speak, recognize that problem and handle it? Or do you as a leader have to get in there and help develop that culture and help kind of give direction to that kind of challenge and help it along a little bit? So I couldn't say there's like a specific way to do it, but again, that responsibility of leadership is to know and to empathetically look at the team and see how does this apply? How should I deal with this? How can they deal with this? How can they learn from this experience?
This is not a political question, but we have a new White House Chief of Staff,
Sure.
General.
Sure.
So I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what might be distinctive about his style of leadership. And specifically, one thing he said that I thought was interesting is that he's not going to try to manage the president at all, but just everyone below him, basically everyone who works with the president. And I don't know, of course that relates to maybe the military hierarchy, but it also could be a contradiction to the idea of, stepping in if you think something needs to be corrected or done differently or whatever.
Right.
So, I don't know, any thoughts on how that military leadership will apply in that situation?
Yeah, it can easily go down a road that none of us want to go down. And I get, yeah. The thing that comes to mind with someone like that, he was a general, so that's one of the highest ranking officers in the Army. Those guys are usually pretty squared away. And the thing that immediately comes to mind is organization. Regardless of the political sway you may have on it, I'll guarantee you one thing, that he's going to be very organized, that chaos is unlikely, at least within the authority he has to control it. It's just, that's just such a bedrock of that part of leadership, and certainly how he's done. So bringing that organization, I think, is going to be
What would organization mean here? Like a stricter reporting order or something like that?
Exactly. Roles, kind of staying in your roles, but also melding those roles together, how you structure the systems that allow that. Scheduling for sure, not just going a free-for-all on type of things. And ultimately with that, building trust, I think, is going to be important. However, whomever that needs to be, with the press, with the Congress, with whomever, I think that's going to be important that he does that through those things. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, certainly one that probably provokes more thought than anyone else. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think it's easier to sweep it aside if the situation is more urgent, or?
No, I never think it's good to sweep things aside, and I think it's best to handle. And that's my personal opinion. And it kind of goes back to that pass it on aspect of it too. And if we look towards other organizations that are really successful, they usually push those decisions to the lowest level so they can be made that fast. And Toyota is a great example. The folks on the assembly line building a pickup or a car or whatever, if they encounter a problem, the manager immediately comes over to them and says, how can I assist with you? They are expected to give a solution. That worker is expected to give a solution. The manager is expected to support that solution. So, and the same thing in the military, it was the same exact thing. If I had a problem and the commanding officer of the squadron, I went to go see him, if I went in there and said, you know what, sir, this thing is all messed up, he'd say, get out of here right now. I don't need problems. I have problems that are in my inbox right now and that are stacked high. What I need from you is solutions. So what I want you to do is come in and tell me what your solutions are. Give me 2 or 3 to the problem you have. I'll make the decision. I have the authority, and this kind of speaks to what you're talking about. I have the authority to pick one or the other, but I want you to come up with the solutions. I want you to be the leader on this. He's the commanding officer. He cannot be in every work center and every place and fly every helicopter. He doesn't know. That's what his expectation is of me, is to be the leader for that. But there's some real hidden gems in that too, in that in doing that, I'm coming up with solutions, but guess whose fingerprints are all over them? Mine. So there's ownership in that. Either solution I've come up with. So if he says, I want you to go with B, run with it. Well, that's something that I came up with. My fingerprints are on there. I have buy-in to that. I have a greater motivation to make my system work, because it's not something someone just ordered me to do. It's something that I came up with, and maybe that speaks a little bit to the leadership versus authority that I think you're kind of driving at. Does that? Yeah. Yeah. Good question though. Great.
Matt, you asked us if we'd ever had a bad boss or someone who was in authority, but a good leader, and everyone raised their hand. What do you suggest, or have you found ways that are successful to sort of challenge that authority in terms of trying to make that person better or improve your own situation? Because a lot of times someone who's below a bad leader or authoritative can't really speak up, and they don't have a lot of choices in terms of.
Yeah, and that's a great one, and that's probably one of the greatest challenges any active participant leader will face in the organization. but you still do have leadership, you know, and it's not just you and them, right? You don't have, it's not like me against my boss. Really, that's kind of a bad way to look at it, I think. I think it's better to look at it like, what's our goal here? How can I lead by example with this? How can I influence my coworkers? How can we all come together to maybe bring something to light that that bad manager or subperforming manager may not see otherwise, and help them along too. And it kind of comes back to that. I asked you all if you thought they were bad people. They're probably not that bad. There's very few like malicious, like, yeah, I can't wait to go to work to screw up some people's lives. Like, it's not very often that happens. They're out there. They're out there for sure. But that's not what they're thinking. You know, their thoughts may be a little bit different, but helping that influence, working as a team member, and setting the example, I think is so important. You know, and of course you come to times too, ultimately where you may have to leave the situation. You may have to come out. You know, it's not ideal, but at least you know you can go with a clear conscience that you've given it your all. So, yeah.
You were talking earlier about leaders stepping away to think about the situation before they act in the situation, which sounds a lot like reflection to me. In your experience in both the military and in civilian life, given how uncertain and urgent and how we're plugged in 24/7, what is your experience in how time is being allocated so that thinking and reflection can actually take place?
In a general sense of time allocation? Yeah, I no, wow, you guys have some really good questions, really challenging ones too. Time allocation, I think something we did in flight school was a lot of visualization. I never flew before I was in the Navy. So what was a very common practice is that we would talk ourselves through an entire landing pattern, you know, going around landing the helicopter or landing the airplane. We started out in airplanes. Okay, I'm putting the landing gear down. I'm making this radio call, and then I'm, you know, actually visualizing going through that kind of stuff, talking yourself through the entire thing and doing it again and again and again. We've all heard of the Blue Angels, right? The Navy's demonstration team. They do that before every single flight they go on. They sit in a big room around a table, close their eyes, and talk through it. The whole thing. Now, does that mean it's going to go exactly like it's planned? No, it never does. But they're preparing for it, and they're mentally taking themselves to a place to where they've already been there in some regard. So to speak to that time management aspect of it, is that even when those situations come up that may be a little bit different, that you need to react to quickly, mentally they've already been there in a place that they can. They've kind of developed those tools that make it a lot easier to react and make an informed decision, because you've been there in some capacity. Does that kind of drive that?
Okay.
Yeah, okay. It's okay.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, good questions though. Oh.
Great, we're about at time here. So thanks so much.
Thank you guys very much.